delighted that you could all join us this morning, both those of you in the audience and those of you who are joining us on the live web stream produced by the Olive Society, the creator of the Global Day of Jewish Learning. We really are delighted that you're all here this morning to spend a day talking about love, devotion, desire, and deception. And it's my pleasure at the beginning of this session to welcome, as he likes to say, one of the rabbis here at Congregation Micah, Rabbi Flip Rice. Flip?
Okay. Brokim Habayim, welcome everyone to Congregation Micah. We welcome as well all those watching this power of the internet. We Jews, we gather this morning as a worldwide community, connected by our belief in the oneness of God and of the world, by our love of Israel and the Jewish people all over the world in the diaspora, and by the mitzvah, by the commandment to busy ourselves with words of Torah. We are thankful, as always, to the Jewish Federation of Middle Tennessee for the holy work that it does. We're happy here, as always, to have Carol Hyatt, its president, Mark Friedman, its director, in making what we are all about to experience really happen. We also want to thank Barbara Schwartz because she works tirelessly, as does the whole staff of the Federation, on behalf of the Jewish people making programs like this possible. Today, our topic for the Global Day of Jewish Learning is going to be love, the antidote, I hope, for what the world really witnessed this last Shabbat. So what we do now is we begin what promises to be a joyful and a meaningful day of learning and community with a few moments of honor and of silence. We Jewish people are taught from the very beginning to bring order to chaos and to bring light to darkness. And like so many times before and now, we are forced to stand in solidarity with those across the planet who have experienced terrorism, not just our Jewish brethren, but now in France. And so as Aaron did when his sons died, I invite you to please rise for a moment of silence. We're going to light some candles on our small Eiffel Tower. France, we stand in solidarité with you, and we mourn with you.
Please be seated. Thank you, Rabbi Rice. We really appreciate your hospitality here today at Congregation Micah. We also want to especially thank Julie Greenberg, the Director of Education, and Todd Evans, Executive Director of Congregation Micah, for all the help they have provided in allowing us into this beautiful, wonderful facility today. The Global Day of Jewish Learning is an important part of our efforts for community-wide Jewish education. And again, we're just so delighted that you're all here today. When we first decided to do this 4 years ago, I approached two individuals who are now very good friends of mine, Libby and Moshe Worthen, who are here with us today, and asked them if they would consider assisting us in the Global Day by providing our lead educator, scholar, spiritual leader, to help us in doing our learning. And they gratefully agreed. And they've done so once again this year by bringing us Rabbi Alex Israel from the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem And Libby and Moshe, we thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. Before I introduce Rabbi Israel to kick off our first learning session this morning, I'd like to remind you, of course, please turn off your cell phones, or at least put them in a condition that they will be rendered paralyzed while we're in the learning session. I would also let you know that for those of you that have not been to Congregation Micah before, the restrooms are out and to the left. And during the lunch hour, we'll be providing you with information about where the afternoon sessions will be. I also wanted to remind those of you in attendance today that we have a community mission going to Israel so that we can all go visit the Pardes Institute when we're in Jerusalem next March and April. So just quickly, put your hands up if you are registered to go on the community mission. Look at that. Fantastic. Well, we've still got room. We're up to about 80. We'd like to take 100. So if you are interested in our community mission to Israel next March 27th to April 7th, please see Naomi Zedek, our mission manager and campaign director. Naomi, please stand. She's in the back of the room. And Naomi will be happy to help you sign up. Again, in the packets you received this morning, in addition to the source sheet that we'll be using for Rabbi Israel's first session, you have some other information. There are welcoming letters. But one thing that's very important there as well is this evaluation form. We would ask that during the course of the day that you take the opportunity to complete this and turn it in. We are ignoring modern technology where you're not feeding the survey monkey. So please go ahead and complete these evaluation forms as you participate in each session. Give us your feedback. It helps us make the Global Bay better each year. And then finally, I'd like to announce before I introduce Rabbi Israel, that on December 2nd at Vanderbilt Hillel in the evening, the Federation, in cooperation with Vanderbilt Hillel, is featuring an evening with David Makovsky. Many of you know of him quite well. He's a wonderful policy analyst on the Middle East. He's served in a number of administrations, and he will be here to discussing with us the latest events in the Middle East, which obviously get more complicated every day. So again, let us kick off now with our opening plenary learning session with Rabbi Alex Israel, who teaches at Yeshivat Eretz Hatzvi and at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies, where he serves as Director of Community Education and the Summer Program. He is a popular lecturer at campuses and communities on 3 continents. In 2013, he published his first book, First Kings Torn in Two, a commentary on Sefer Melachim. Born and raised in London, you'll notice that by the accent, Rabbi Israel was an active youth leader in B'nai Akiva and was the director of the Sixth Form Study Center at LSJS, and he's going to tell us what that is. He moved to Israel in 1991 and gained rabbinic ordination from the Israeli chief rabbinate following several years of study at Yeshivat Har Etzion. Rabbi Israel holds degrees from London School of Economics, the Institute of Education London, and Bar Ilan University. Rabbi Israel lives in Alon Shavut, Gush Etzion, with his wife Eliza and their 4 wonderful children. He enjoys running, music, and everything to do with contemporary Israel. Please welcome our guest scholar, Rabbi Alex Israel.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. Thank you to Congregation Micah for the warm welcome that I've received from them and from your rabbi. I'd also like to thank Mark, who I've been in contact with back and forth. Thank God for email. And he's been arranging and fine-tuning every detail here. So I want to thank the Federation, and particularly to Mark, who's really paid attention to everything. And I'd also like to thank my hosts, the Worthen family, for being so warm and welcoming. And thank you to you all. The subject of our day of learning today is love, devotion, desire, and deception. And I've chosen to take the topic of Jewish unity and take one of the most classic biblical stories, the story of Rachel and Leah, Rachel and Leah, our matriarchs. You'll find the sheet, Rachel and Leah, in your packet. That's what you're going to need for this session. Maybe in the Nashville Jewish community, as I hear, there's a huge amount of Jewish unity. But Jewish togetherness has always been a struggle. I'm sure people know in the Second Temple, there were struggles. We're approaching the period of Hanukkah between the Maccabees and the Hellenized Jews. Later on, it was between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. In more contemporary times, in, 18th century Europe, you have the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim. I could go through almost every generation and describe the Jewish groups who were warring between each other, and I dread to even begin the list of contemporary controversies in the Jewish world, in Israel and around the globe. We have our divisions. And I would like to today discuss, and don't worry, I'm not going to leave you by the end of the hour in a depressed state of being. In fact, the aim of today is going to be to provide us with some optimism, but some realism. But I would like to go back in time to one of the most ancient divisions of our people. And that is the division between Yehuda and Yosef, between Judah and Joseph. And let me try and explain what I'm referring to, because I'm not sure that everybody is so familiar with the history. In ancient Israel, there was a period in which the Jewish state was unified under a single king. We had the period of King David, the period of King Solomon, which provided a sort of heyday for the Jewish nation. They had come into the land and been divided into lots of tribes, and after a long period, they came together under a single king. First King Saul, King David, King Solomon. And the temple was built, the monarchy was established. But no sooner had the great King Solomon died and left the national stage, there was a revolution. And the kingdom split into two. In the south, the kingdom of Judah, the tribe of Yehuda, led by the Davidic kings, the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of King David. And then in the north, there was the kingdom of Ephraim, led by the tribes of Joseph. And this state of being was never healed. For we maybe had a united monarchy for about 80 years, and then for the next 300 years, a divided kingdom. Jews simply couldn't get on, and we had not one Jewish country, but two Jewish states living alongside each other. And periodically, I would even say worse than even having two Jewish countries, they went to war against each other, and there were periods of civil war. Now, the truth is that this didn't happen in a vacuum, because this division between Judah and Joseph, between the southern tribe of Judah and the northern tribes, actually existed upon an ethnic fault line. An ethnic fault line which is much like the, maybe you'd say the contemporary division between, in Israel for sure, Ashkenazim and Sephardim, Jews from European descent and Jews from the countries, the Arabic countries. It's always fascinating how it seems to provide, in Israel we have this ability where if a politician wants to start, getting a bit of rabble-rousing, he can do it very easily by pitting the Ashkenazim against the Sephardim, because they come from different communities, and it's easy for one group to feel that the other group is separate to them. It's almost like these groups which became two states came from two different ethnic groups, Judah, Joseph in the Jewish body politic. And I wonder, where did these come from? And I'm going to claim in today's class that this goes down to a very deep historic divide. I'm sure we all know the story of Joseph. If we don't know it from our Bible studies, we all know it from the musical, okay? I can always be sure, if there's a musical, people will know that. If you don't know it from the Bible, you know it from, Tim Rice and, Andrew Lloyd Webber. So, there we all remember the scene where we've got Benjamin, and Benjamin is caught between his two brothers. On the one hand, Judah, and on the other hand, Joseph. These are the two main forces in this family. And the interesting thing about them is that even though they have a single father, Jacob, they actually have different mothers. One's mother is Rachel, and the other one is Leah. And therefore, to understand the roots of our ethnic divides, I want to go right to the start. And today we're going to discuss who exactly is Rachel and who exactly is Leah. Rachel and Leah. We talk about the Jewish people having 3 avot, 3 patriarchs and 4 matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel and Leah. And it's Rachel and Leah who are married to the same man, to Jacob. And I want to examine their story. We're going to really engage in some serious text study today, like we like to do in the Pardes Institute in Jerusalem. We're going to get into some text study. We're going to read the actual verses themselves. If we have time, we might even look at a few commentaries and try and understand what their story is. And I think if we understand their story, and we'll see a huge amount of tension between these 2 women, these 2 co-wives, maybe we'll understand some of the tension which was passed down to their children, the different energies that they passed into the Jewish people. And we'll understand maybe the source of our conflict, but we'll also understand the source of its healing. And that's what I'd like to get to today. So that's all by way of introduction. And now I'd like you to take the source sheet and we're going to start to take a look. Let me just introduce the scene and help remind you of the story in case you're not familiar with it. Jacob has had to leave home. Jacob was chased out of home by his brother Esau, who wanted to kill him. We're not going to get into that story. It's way too much for today. And he goes to the rest of the clan. They're living in the land of Canaan, in the land of Israel. And they go to the clan who lives in Mesopotamia, in the land of Aram. And Jacob leaves home penniless with nothing at all. On his way out the door, his father said to him, "Hey son, you're not married yet. We want to make a great nation of the Jewish people. When you go to Haran, when you go to your uncle Laban's house, it's time to get married. Go find yourself a wife, just like I found my wife in the house of Bethuel and Lavan. I want you to find a wife there." Jacob is traveling into the unknown, penniless, to find his family, but with the knowledge in his mind that he really does need to find himself a nice Jewish shidduch. Okay, he's got to get married to a member of his family. There's this actually absolutely wonderful scene, which I'm sure you all remember, where he goes and he's not quite sure where he is, and he comes, and I assume he's asking, like kids do in the car, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" And he gets to a certain area, and he meets, he gets to this place, the land of the Easterners, and there he finds a well in a field, and a bunch of shepherds around the well. And he says to them, "Where are you from?" And they say, "We're from Haran." That's where he knows Laban's from. And he says to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" That's his uncle. "Do you know my uncle?" And they said, "Yes, we do." Can you imagine? Jacob's been traveling for weeks. This is great news. He's reached the mishpacha. He's reached the people he knows. This is fantastic. They say, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is. And here's his daughter. His daughter is coming with the flocks." Now, the thing that the text tells us as well is that apparently there isn't a lot of water. Of course, this is the Middle East. Nothing's changed. There isn't a lot of water here. And in order to protect their water resources, they used to put a huge stone on the well, wait till all the shepherds were together. And only when all the shepherds were together would they be able to have enough hands on deck to be able to actually move this stone. And the text says here that when Jacob saw Rachel, if you want to know, I'm reading in chapter 29, verse 10. Chapter 29, verse 10, it's about a third of the way down. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Lavan, and a flock of his uncle Lavan, he sees Rachel surrounded by the sheep, maybe a very pastoral image. Jacob went up and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well and watered the flock of his uncle Laban. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and broke into tears. Very interesting image. Quite a first meeting, okay? He goes and he seems to be experiencing such joy and relief mixed together. First of all, what he does is he engaged in this, some people think that he love at first sight. He saw Rachel, he saw this gorgeous looking girl, and he wanted to impress her, and single-handedly, he lifts this stone off the well, goes up to this girl who is his cousin and kisses her, and then bursts into tears. I don't know if he made a good impression, but I assume that his tears are simply a sign of relief. Sign of relief. He suddenly found his family after wandering around for so long, and he's probably found the girl he's going to marry. And this is where I want to take up the story with you, and I've tried to divide up the biblical text, make it easier, by putting a few pointers, and we're going to start with star 1. That's where we're going to start our reading to understand the story. And I'm actually going to be asking you to think about the story yourselves as we go through. And as we get to the second section, star 2, we're going to actually ask for some feedback from the audience and get you helping us understand the story. But I'm going to read a little bit. Now, Laban had 2 daughters. I'm aware it says star 1. You're welcome to read in the Hebrew. I've put the star 1 in the Hebrew and also in the English. Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. In Hebrew, Einei Leah rakot. Her eyes were soft. The English here, which is the JPS translation, her eyes were weak. I don't know whether she needed glasses like me, except they hadn't been invented yet. So she had poor eyesight, or whether there was something else about her eyes, which made her eyes look interesting. We'll see a different interpretation in a second. So Leah had weak eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel. So he answered, I will serve 7 years. He answered his father-in-law, I'll serve 7 years for your younger daughter. And indeed, Laban says, better that I give her to you than I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. Okay, quite a romantic story. I want to already start focusing on this initial image of these 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. Because what does it tell us about them? The first thing we hear about Leah is her weak eyes. What's it trying to tell us about her? She's got weak eyes, and Rachel, she's beautiful. Why do you think it's telling us this information? Anyone have an idea? Why is this information important? Yes. Okay, so maybe it could be that weak eyes is a euphemism saying that basically she's not good looking, right? Or at least there's something about her which is off-putting. In which case, what is Jacob interested in? The good-looking girl, right? He's interested in the good looks, right? And that's what he's into at this stage of his life, right? Young man, what have you? Yes. Okay, so eyes are an element of perception. What this lady said was, she doesn't quite perceive. Eyes give insights. There's something about Leah that she doesn't see. Now I'm going to agree with the opinion over here which said that there's something that Rachel is the more beautiful. Of course it says Rachel has beautiful appearance. It says she shapely and beautiful. Let me add that all the rabbis say that the Bible would never ever talk about a lady's figure. You know, it couldn't do such a thing. It must be talking about her face, only her face, right? And when it says she is a beautiful form, it's talking about her bone structure of her face. And when it says a beautiful complexion, a beautiful beautiful vision, it's obviously talking about her complexion of her skin. But we're only referring to the face, okay? I'll let you judge whether that's the truth. But I think it's trying to say, of course, that Leah was less attractive, Rachel was more attractive, and that's why Jacob was immediately attracted to her. But I would like to give you an alternative rabbinic reading, because it's going to be relevant later on. And if you turn to page number 3 in your packets. By the way, some of them try to be very kind. Some of the commentaries try to be very kind to Leah, I should just add. And they say, because the Hebrew is Einei Leah rakot. Now, rach means soft, gentle. Okay? So the problem with eyes is everybody's eyes are soft, right? A finger in your eye. Nobody has hard eyes. So when you say Leah's eyes are soft, what do they mean? Right? One of the opinions, the Rashban, for example, said that actually it's trying to complement them both. It's saying Leah had stunning eyes, right? Her eyes were gentle, refined, beautiful, right? I wonder when in a Semitic culture where everybody has brown eyes or black eyes, maybe she had blue eyes or green eyes. She had particularly attractive eyes. So they're trying to complement them both. Leah had great eyes and Rachel had a good figure or something. I don't know. It doesn't sound that way from the context. Do you agree? But I want to give you Rashi's reading, who actually does explain that Leah looked pretty bad, but wants to see it as a backhanded compliment. Let's read Rashi. It's the third thing on page 3. And he says like this, Einei Leah rakot. Her eyes were tender because she expected to fall into Esau's lot. She wept because everybody was saying, Rebekah has 2 sons and Laban has 2 daughters. The older daughter for the older son and the younger daughter for the younger son. This is a pretty jam-packed comment by the famous commentator Rashi, probably the most famous commentator of all. I always like to quote him first. But let me just try and unpack it a little bit. Because there are 2 families, and each have 2 children. In the Jacob family, there are 2 boys, right? Yeah, Esau and Jacob. Esau's the older one. Jacob, the second one. In Laban's family, there are 2 girls, right? Leah's the older one, and Rachel, the younger one. Now, of course, if you've read the Bible, you know Esau's the bad guy, right? He's the evil one, and Jacob's meant to be the good one, right? We won't get into whether we agree with that, but that's the assumption. And so what he says is that Leah was totally righteous, and they'd always told her since she was a little girl, you, like your mother, are going to marry the family in Canaan, and the older's going to marry the older, and the younger's the younger. And she heard that Esau was really, really a violent character. So what did Leah do her whole life? She cried. Poor Leah. Leah spent her adolescence crying. Oh no, don't let me marry that violent Esau. And therefore her eyes got all teary and red. And they got it, And that's why Leah had weak eyes. That's why she had weak eyes. Why would the Bible tell us something like this? We need to know their external appearance. You have to understand that Leah was righteous. And in her righteousness, she spent all her years crying because don't let me marry Esau. Right? And Rachel, who knew she was going to marry Jacob, she was sort of like, okay, great, I got the good pick. The irony of the story is, of course, that Leah's tears were answered according to this midrash. And who did she end up marrying? Also Jacob. Now, I'm going to, I want you to keep this in your mind. We'll talk about it right at the end. You know what? I want to give it away already. Some of you have probably visited on one of your trips to Israel, Rachel's tomb. And Rachel's tomb is a place in Bethlehem. Now it's a little bit of a beleaguered spot, but traditionally Rachel's tomb was always a place where people saw Rachel, in the words of Jeremiah, Rachel crying for her children. It's very interesting that at the beginning of the story, Rashi imagines, the rabbinic tradition imagines, Leah crying. And in her death, Rachel is described as crying. And we're going to talk about that right at the end. Okay? Just want to point this out now. Yes, Moshe.
Just a small problem with this theory, and that is that Esau is already married. He married 2 Hittite women. And then Yitzchak says to Jacob, why don't you go up and check out, your cousins up there and see. The way you described it, as Rashi would have had, from birth, they knew they were going to marry each other, but it doesn't sound really like that's the way it's going.
Okay, so Moshe is actually reading the text as it should be read, according to what we call the pshat, the literal reading of the text, right? Except this is the rabbinic tradition, which brings all sorts of multiple layers. Moshe, I think you're 100% right. I don't think Esau intended to be running off to Mesopotamia to go find his wives. In fact, he already has married 2 Hittite women, and when he saw his dad didn't like his wives, he went and married Ishmael's daughter as well. Okay, so he already has multiple wives, and he's not making it up to Laban's house anytime soon. Right? This seems to have been, according to Rashi, a tradition in Laban's family, right, which Esau has no knowledge of. But I've got to be honest, I agree with you. I don't think this is a I don't think this is the pshat. I don't think this is a simple or straightforward meaning of the text. I bring it in order to maybe explain, show you how the rabbis tried to see this as a compliment to both of them, but also because I want to already put in the back of our minds the image of a crying Leah at the beginning, because you'll see how things flip very, very quickly later on. Okay, we will leave this segment of the first segment with this image of Jacob romantically attached to the very, very beautiful looking Rachel. Their love is described, I read it before. He served 7 years for Rachel. He worked as a shepherd for 7 years, and they seemed but a few days because of his love for her. The time passed. He couldn't wait. It's actually funny that, because usually when you're really waiting for something, the time seems to go slowly, not fast. I don't quite know what to do with that. But it does say that out of his love for her, it went like a flash. He couldn't wait. And of course, then what happens? Okay, and I'm going to be reading from verse 21 here. Everybody with us? Yeah, verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled. I've worked for 7 years. I may cohabit with her." Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah, he meaning Laban, and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. He was intimate with her. Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid, and when the morning came, he spent the night with Leah. He had thought he was marrying Rachel. 7 years he's planned to marry Rachel. In the morning, I guess everybody doesn't quite understand how he didn't notice all night. Okay? I've got to be honest, I don't really understand myself how he didn't notice. It's possible that apart from these eyes, that they were very, very similar looking. Maybe, but you'd think that though he knew them for 7 years, he'd be able to tell the difference, right? Some people claimed, and maybe this is the best explanation, that at the wedding he'd drunk a little too much, right? And he wasn't quite with it, right? It does say it was in the morning, maybe it was very dark. Other people have suggested in the Oriental world, they had separate wedding feasts. The women and the men separated and danced and had their feasts separately. And it's not entirely clear, but it says, and when morning came, there was Leah. So he says to Laban, "What have you done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me?" Laban said, "It's not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older. Wait until the bridal week is over, and we'll give you that one too." Laban doesn't seem to, he keeps on calling his daughters that one, right? Laban doesn't seem to care too much about his daughter's feelings. "We'll give you that one too, provided you serve me another 7 years. And Jacob did so. He waited out the bridal week of 1, and then he gave his daughter Rachel as a wife. Wow. So Laban's done a great deal here, by the way. It seems like Jacob is powerless to complain. And now he's got 7 extra years of working of work out of Jacob. And he's also managed to marry off the daughter who isn't so attractive. Okay? If you think about it, you'd think in these 7 years, if he's got 2 daughters of marriageable age, he could have married off Leah. I assume he presumed. He had the daughter with the defective eyes who wasn't finding herself a husband. If he can trick Jacob, right? He saw that Jacob apparently could be tricked. He could get a great deal. He'll marry off both daughters, and he'd get another 7 years of work. Okay, this is not a class about Laban, right? So I'm not going to deal with him, but I don't think we particularly like the way he goes. But now I want to deal with the real tension, okay? The real tension. And let's take a look where it says start to. Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. I'm going to read a whole segment and then I'm going to go and analyze it, and I'm going to ask you for your help, okay? Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. Indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah. Already just asked a question for you to think about. He loved Rachel more than Leah. Does that mean that Leah's loved or Leah's not loved? It seems she's loved. Okay, now he served another 7 years. The Lord saw that Leah was unloved. In the Hebrew, it's even stronger. Ki sanu'ah Leah. Leah was hated. And he opened her womb. He gave her the ability to have children. but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and she bore a son and she called him Reuven. Why? Each of it's very interesting, by the way, the mothers name the children, not the fathers. And they always name them about something that's going on in their lives, frequently something that's going on in their marriage. She calls him Reuven. Why? She says, Ra'ah Hashem ba'oni. God has seen my affliction. God has seen my pain. Ki ata yehevani yeti. Ishi. Maybe now my husband will love me. Interesting. She has another child. By the way, each time she has a child, you've got to imagine that a year's gone by, right? At least 9 months has gone by, but probably a year. She's got to, get better after the birth. At least a year. She has another child, and she calls him Shimon. It says, she conceived again and bore a son, and declared, this is because the Lord has heard that I was unloved and given me this one also. So she named him Shimon. In the Hebrew, again, very strong Hebrew. Ki shama Hashem ki sanu'a anochi, I am hated. And again she conceived and bore a son and declared, this time my husband will become attached to me. Hapam yilaveh ishi elai, because I have borne him 3 sons. This child is called Levi. Yilaveh, Levi. You hear the same alliteration. And then she conceived a 4th son. She conceived again, and she said, this time I will praise God. Hapam odet Hashem. And she called his name Yehuda, Judah. Apparently she's happy at the birth of Judah. So now I want to examine this a little bit with you. Again, if we start from star number 2, I want to ask the question. It said here, Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. He loved Rachel more than Leah. And then Lord saw that Leah was unloved. Is Leah loved or is Leah unloved? How does Jacob feel towards Leah? What do you think? What's your feeling? What's Jacob's feelings towards Leah? What do you see from this narrative? Does he hate her? What do you think? He cares about her, okay? He's still, by the way, he's still treating her as a wife. He's still clearly sleeping with her because she's having child after child, right? He's performing his conjugal duties, okay, if we want to put it that way, okay? Now the problem here is we have a few difficult, almost contradictory phrases. On one hand, it says, he loved Rachel more than Leah, which indicates that Rachel is loved, I don't know, give her a 10, okay? And Leah, I don't know whether it's a 3 or it's a 7, but she's less loved. On the other hand, it says, and God saw that Leah was unloved. Anybody can explain that? What's going on here? Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. Exactly. It doesn't really help if Jacob has this wonderful romantic relationship with Rachel, and they feel this passionate love, and he's showering her with gifts, and they go out to date nights and what have you. And Leah, he comes home and he says to her, I don't know what he says, but he's very polite and kind and nice to her. He even buys her a birthday present or something like that, but that's about it, right? She's going to feel, like she's getting the thin end of the wedge here. She's not going to be happy. It doesn't help when you're comparatively less loved. It feels like terrible. It feels miserable, right? So we could say that she's experiencing subjectively a feeling of being unloved, even though he can say, look, I love you, but what do you want me to do? I love Rachel more. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to repeat what you said for those people who didn't hear. Human nature is very complicated. He could have had moments in which he, tried to be very civil and nice and treated her as a good husband should. But it could have been creeping in all the time, a good deal of resentment for what she'd done. And if you can see the sources here on page 3, I bring a commentary by Nachmanides, the Ramban, The first comment, Radak, is what this lady over here said, right? Where he says that she was comparatively less loved. But Ramban says it much deeper. I'll just read a few lines. Leah was hated, despised. After all, she lied to and betrayed both Jacob and her sister. Even if she could not have defied her father when he brought her to the wedding, could she not have told Jacob or signaled to him that she was Leah? And she hid her identity from him the entire night. That is why Jacob hated her. This is quite strong language, okay? I think you'll agree. In other words, I'll just pause there for a minute and read the bit in a second. In other words, Jacob really, he couldn't be in the same room as her. He felt, duped by her, tricked by her. What sort of behavior is that, right? You couldn't have said to me, Jake, you're going to come into the bridal chamber and said, Jacob, we have a problem. I'm Leah. My dad forced me. What do you want to do? I understand. I don't want to be mean to Rachel. I don't want to be mean to you, but this is just going to have to happen. Okay. And, she went along with it, right? Sometimes you even feel that Leah really felt her marriage prospects were low and she was almost happy to go through with it. And I get this impression, I can't even imagine, right? Leah Jacob coming out home from a long day of work and finding Leah in the kitchen, and I know he goes and sits down at the computer, right? He's not interested in being in the same room as her, right? Literally can't say a good word to her. But I don't know, I might feel that way. I would totally understand it. What sort of a crazy situation to put yourself in? This is an intense situation. And I want to maybe stress this even through the text. I look at this, and I look even at verse 30, and there's one word that I like to focus on here where it says, Vayavod gam el Rachel. He was also intimate with Rachel. He was also, that's that word gam in English as well. It says, and Jacob cohabited with Rachel also, right? They put also at the end, but in the Hebrew it's at the beginning. I always feel that word gam, the word also is very, very violent. What do I mean? I mean it like this. Rachel and Jacob have this wonderful romantic relationship. I think of them, dreaming of they're dreaming of their honeymoon, where they're going to, be going on a horse-drawn carriage through Central Park, okay, sipping champagne together, right? And indeed, this is their dream, and they've been planning the honeymoon and what have you, yeah? And indeed, they do go on that horse-drawn carriage in Central Park, but sitting in between them in the horse-drawn carriage is Leah. Because when he gets to be intimate with Rachel, there's a third person in the marriage. And this is very painful, right? And you can see the pain of Leah, because look what she names her children. Yeah, Reuven, because God has seen my pain. Maybe now my husband will love me. Another year goes by, she has another child. She calls him Shimon. God has seen I'm hated. Third child, Hapam yilav ve'ishi elai. Maybe my husband maybe he'll accompany me. Maybe he will go on a date with me after all. Very interesting. Yes?
Because every day, under the hookah, she said, maybe now her love you. I don't say anything. I go through.
Oh, interesting.
Then her love you. Well, he does. And then comes the next child, and now her love you. And I think that her pain is there, but we don't actually look at it from Leah's point of view, where she is in a position where she can't really speak out.
Okay. Yes? Right. What was up with Rachel, right? How did you get away with it without Rachel? I mean, of course, Rachel couldn't have been there as the bride of honor at the wedding, right? I sometimes wonder whether Rachel, like in the movies, she was there with like tape over her mouth and tied up somewhere in the bedroom, somewhere in some back room in the basement in Laban's house. How did he keep her aside? One of the interesting questions is whether there was some sort of like Rachel played along with it, in which case he should be angry with Rachel too. which is, oh yeah, we're going to see that. We're going to see that. Yes. Right. Okay. So at some level, the women clearly have no power. It is interesting, by the way, later on, we do see, even with Jacob, we do see that with Jacob, they seem to be able to decide amongst themselves who spends the night with Jacob. There's a story later about the mandrakes. I don't think we're going to get to it, but they can actually decide who spends the night with Jacob. That's the women's decision, not his decision, which is fascinating. But maybe they had no power against their father, Laban, right? We find in many cultures you couldn't defy the father. But one of the interesting things, if we're saying that women are powerless and a little bit of an object in ancient society, here the Bible spends a lot of time talking about their feelings. Which is actually is at least giving, they're not absolutely objects. The Bible is interested in probing how they feel. And that is definitely something which is of significance here. I want to just, okay, we'll take these two comments and then I'm going to move on a little bit. Yes? Okay, what this gentleman is pointing out is that Jacob tricked his father. He tried to usurp, he was the younger, and he tried to go and switch the order. He took the older and switched it for the younger, and the younger switched it for the older. So he's, what goes around comes around. And he might be feeling in his own mind that it's like a divine punishment, right? That he tricked his father and put the older before the younger, or the younger before the older, and now look what's happening to him. A very, very, by the way, the Midrash also focuses on that point and says exactly that point. So that's right on the, right. I would totally agree with you, and I'm only not going to dwell on what you say because I want to focus on Rachel and Leah, not on Jacob. But you're 100% right, yes.
So when we're also in reference to the comment we previously about the power of women, perhaps women have their power in being mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And because she had long encouraged Jacob to deceive.
There is this, and it's been documented in many, both in world literature and certainly in the Bible as well. Frequently, the way when women on the surface, right, don't have the power, they find other ways to have power, right? What was in that great line in that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding? What was it? Where the woman says, they talk about the patriarch of the family, and the woman says, "It is true that he is the head of the family, but us women, we are the neck." There's that great line. So women also find a way to manipulate things. If you think about the book of Esther, right? Esther manages to, but she doesn't do it through the halls of government. She does it through the bedroom and through the feasts, and women can find other ways of finding their way, but frequently it's not through the authority structures, but it's through some other structure. So it is very, very interesting, the ways things work in ancient societies. I'm going to try and keep our focus on Rachel and Leah, and all these comments are fabulous, and thank you. But I want to try and see something changes with Leah. Leah has 3 children. She feels hated. She feels displaced. And then she has Judah. And when she has Judah, she calls him Judah, which is Yehuda. And she says, Hapam odet Hashem. This time I will praise God. Yehuda is from the same word of the Hoda'ah. Hodu Lashem Kitov, we say in Hebrew. Praise God, for he is good, right? Hoda'ah. She has a 4th child and says, praise God. The first one, I hate it. The second one, maybe my husband will love me. Maybe my husband will accompany me. Praise God. What changed with the fourth child? Did something change? Yes. Okay. Maybe she changed. Her perception changed. She's yearning for her husband's love. She's not getting it. A year goes by, 2 years goes by, 3 years goes by. He still can't look her in the face. Okay. So she says, listen, I'm giving up on my marriage, right? My marriage stinks, yeah, but you know what? I have great kids, right? I have a great career. I like my neighbors. And, everything's good. So, okay, I don't have a good marriage. You can't have everything in life, right? And so she says, she actually shifts her attitude and stops pinning all her self-esteem, her happiness, her prestige on her marriage, right? And she says, thank God, I've got a lot of good in my life, right? Count your blessings, okay? That's one way of looking at it. That's option A. Option B. Yeah. Right? Maybe over the last few years, Jacob's changed. Jacob is actually warmed to Leah. We even have this phrase in Hallel, in our Psalms, of the Eim Habanim Smecha, the happy mother of children. And if I had to describe it or try and animate it for you, I would say it like this. I have 4 children. Actually, my youngest is also called Yehuda, right? Our 4th children, we also felt Hapam Oded Hashem. Not that we'd had problems before, but we just felt very happy, so we called him Yehuda as well, our 4th child. But we always used to say when you had 1 child, so two adults are doting on 1 child. When you have 2 kids, it's 1-on-1. When you have 3 kids, you have to start playing zone defense, right? Where I don't know what happens when you have the 4th. Imagine, right? Again, maybe I'm taking a too modern view of parenting in what I'm saying, but I'm sure there was some of this even in the ancient world. You've got four young children, according to the timeline that we think there were 4 children under the age of 4, right? So Leah needs a little bit of help, okay? Suddenly somebody's got to stay at home when, one of the kids is not feeling well. Somebody has to take them to their doctor's appointments, to their, little league, occasionally they're out walking with all the kids. And, now Jacob, before he had nothing, they had no romantic talk, but now, how's Shimon doing in school? What did the teachers say about him? Has his cold cleared up? Oh, look, isn't he cute? They take a few family pictures, right? Suddenly they find they've got something to talk about. Suddenly, not necessarily as a romantic couple, but as parents of the same children, they start developing a rapport, a relationship. Now, Jacob's got maybe much more to talk about with Leah, or much greater need to talk to Leah than he had way before, and maybe even more than Rachel. And we start feeling that when Leah says at the 4th child, now I will praise God, something has shifted in the relationship. Something serious has shifted. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a wonderful segue to read the next segment. And we're just going to read, we're not going to have a chance to read too much more than this, but we're going to read the first 2 verses here, first 3 verses, and you're going to see exactly what you're pointing to. We have here, chapter 30, verse 1. Everybody with me? You've got it on page 2. Chapter 30, verse 1. When Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children, she became envious of her sister. This isn't entirely surprising, okay? She's becoming jealous. I mean, if I was right and the relationship's warming up between Leah, she's also jealous, not only of her sister, but of Jacob's moving away from her, right? And moving to Leah. And Rachel said to Jacob, give me children or I will die. Jacob was incensed at Rachel. In the Hebrew, right? It says, Vayichar af. He was furious. He got angry with her. And he says, can I take the place of God who has denied you fruit of the womb? And then she said, here's my maid Bilhah, consort with her. She basically says, take Bilhah, my handmaid, be intimate with her. She'll get pregnant because I can't. And she'll basically be I'll adopt the children. We'll have surrogate children, right? That's basically how you did things, right? Okay, let's deal. It's very fascinating because this is one of the only conversations where we hear Rachel talking to Jacob. I think it might be the only direct speech we hear between them. And it's a row. Rachel and Jacob are meant to have this romantic love. It's interesting that we hear about Jacob's love for Rachel. Text never tells us that Rachel loved Jacob back. I will point that out, which is fascinating. It says Jacob loved Rachel, but still, we imagine that they've got this wonderful romantic relationship, and yet the only record we have of a conversation is this fight. So she turns around and says, give me children or else I'm going to die. And Jacob gets angry with her and says, can I take the place of God who's denied you the fruit of the womb? What's going on here? What's happening to Rachel? Is Jacob acting nicely here? Is Rachel acting reasonably here? And maybe I'll add a further question. When Rachel says, give me children or else I'll die, what does she want Jacob to do? What do you think? How are we going to analyze this scene? Yes, sir.
I think it's the argument before that Leah was starting to gain more traction in the household, I guess.
Right.
Jacob was paying more attention to her, she was bearing the children, and Rachel's starting to feel left out, and she's trying to raise her.
Right. Okay. So the children start becoming the main thing. Yeah. She wants him to intercede with God. Okay. It's fascinating. The Torah portion we read this week, Parshat Toldot, begins with their parents who also have difficulty having children. Okay. Then we have Isaac and Rebekah also have difficulty having children. And it says there that Isaac pleaded to God. By the way, he didn't get an answer immediately. It took 20 years of marriage to have children, but yet, the way the Bible says it, he beseeched God, and God answered him, and they were able to have twins. So, very interesting. She says, give me children. In other words, what she's saying, your father prayed, go pray for me. Now, what's his reaction? What's his response? He's assuming no responsibility. What's amazing is he actually gets angry with her. He gets angry with her. He's like basically saying, why are you driving me crazy? Right? He says, am I in the place of God? I don't hold the buttons. I can't decide what God does, right? By the way, there are interesting ways of reading this verse. If I just reread it in a sort of, I'm going to make it in probably the worst way you could probably read it, okay? And Jacob was incensed with Rachel and says, can I take the place of God who has denied you children, the fruit of the womb? In other words, you're telling me to pray? I've got kids. Leah's got kids. You haven't got kids. There must be something wrong with you. This isn't nice. This is not sensitive, right? If you're doing marriage counseling, read this passage and tell them this is not what you do, okay? Yes, sir. Right. Interesting. Okay. We definitely have an interesting story with Elkanah and Hannah. And we remember the story about Hannah, who was so desperately wanted children and cries out before God. And a really famous Bible story, right? And Elkanah tries to console her. She, doesn't accept his consolation, but we don't see him getting angry, right? We don't see him getting angry. Here, he gets angry. So this is a remarkable thing. Again, let's turn to the writings of Nachmanides. You see it on page 4. And then we're going to jump out of the text a little bit, and I'm going to jump to try and describe what we want to say. Just 1 minute.
As you're flipping to the next page, We just wanted to say goodbye to our live streaming audience. The videotaping will continue, so those of you that won't be joining us for the continuation of this lesson will be able to see it another time. We thank the Olive Society for joining us this morning, and I turn the program back over to Rabbi Israel to find out how many more children will Jacob bang out.
If you take a look on page 4, I just wanted to say Nachmanides, again, very important 12th century commentator of Spain, really, to my mind, amazing commentator because he brings together and comments on, he unites a sort of like approach to text along with approach to tradition. Is always balancing the earlier commentators, Rashi and Ibn Ezra and others, but I'd just like to share some of his thoughts here. He says on the bottom of page 4, I am astounded. Why did Jacob get angry? Why did he say, am I in the place of God? Doesn't God listen to the righteous? Don't the righteous customarily pray on the behalf of others? In other words, Jacob, if you're a holy man, if you're a prophet, if you see ladders going up to the heaven, if you have visions of God, if you are a man of God, then go pray for your wife. We find holy men praying for other people. If she says to you, give me children or else I'm going to die, she's desperate, please pray for him. Don't say, am I in the place of God? Go and appeal to God. In the Midrash, they express disapproval. They say, is this how one responds to those who suffer? But the textual reading is, that when Rachel told Jacob to give her children, she intended him to pray on her behalf and not desist until God would give her children at all costs. Otherwise, she would die in her bitter pain. She spoke inappropriately in her passion. She thought that out of his love for her, he would clothe himself in sackcloth and ashes and would pray for her. Jacob got angry because she spoke in the way of hysterical. I have to say this is a very diplomatic translation. I didn't translate this. In the Hebrew, it says, she spoke in the way of the Nashim Ha'avot, Ga'guei HaNashim Ha'avot, the agitations of women in love. It's not, I think that's even more than hysterical women, right? Trying to frighten him with threats of death. In other words, what really ticked Jacob over? If she would have said, pray for me, it wouldn't have been, but when she said, I'm going to die, right? Here she's pushing his emotional buttons. And sometimes we all have our moments of anger when something, ticks us off. And that's why he said, I'm not in God's place to be able to grant children in any situation. And that she'd been denied children, not him. And he wanted to rebuke and embarrass her. The Ramban now adds something remarkable. And he says, the last line here, the righteous Rachel, and he sees her as righteous, when she saw that she could not rely upon Jacob's prayer, took to praying herself. To he who hears our cries, Shomer Tza'aka, to the one who hears the human scream, the human cry, and thus God listened to her. What he's relating to is verse 22, where she actually does have a child. And now God remembered Rachel. God heeded her and opened her womb. In other words, she asked Jacob to pray, and he refused to. I don't know why he refused to. In the words of Rashi, he says, for example, when my father prayed, he himself was desperate. He had no children. He had no children. His wife had no children. But I have children. I can't build up the personal energy to pray for you. You're going to have to pray because you, like Hannah, you mentioned Hannah before, are childless, and you feel the pain in a way that I simply can't, whichever way. In the end, when she actually does get a child, Rachel, God listened to her. Rachel prays. Rachel turns to God. She realizes Jacob is not going to be able to help her, and she listens to God, and she prays herself, and she gets her child. I'm going to mention one last detail, and then I'm going to try and bring this together and explain where I've been taking all of this. Interestingly enough, when Rachel has her first child, his name is Yosef, Joseph. What does Joseph mean? Or why did she call him Joseph? On the last line of page 2, may the Lord add another son for me. Yosef, from Lahosif, right? She says, she has a child. She's waited all these years for this child. What does she call him? Give me another one, right? It's amazing. And the funny thing is, then she doesn't have another child for a while. She clearly really has fertility problems. And actually a very important topic when I'm working in certain communities. I frequently use this as an example to try and raise sensitivity, especially in young communities, about the pain that can go with the difficulties of fertility and the pain that people can experience when they really would love to have children and cannot have. But she eventually does have her second child, Benjamin. And this terrible thing is that the moment when she has her heart's desire, her second child, that is the moment of her death. She dies in childbirth. And here I want to try and give a broader view of Rachel and Leah, of Rachel and Leah. I said I wanted to try and explain the energies of these two women. And I'm going to do this since especially we're on the Global Day of Jewish Learning, which was set up by the Aleph Society and Rabbi Steinsaltz. I've always loved the essay of Rav Steinsaltz about Rachel and Leah. Let me maybe add, I have got to add this because coming from Israel, it's really, I always love to bring a bit of Israel with me. And this essay by Rav Steinsaltz, which you'll see on page 5 and 6, I'm not going to read it, I'm going to tell you what it says, but you can, when you have time, you can read it. Or if you're sick of listening to me, you can read it. It was actually comes from, there are some major radio stations in Israel. There's the regular, I don't know the names of American radio stations, but these equivalents of like the BBC, whatever you call it, right? And that's Reshet Bet. And then there's Army Radio. There's one Army Radio which plays music all day, and there's another Army Radio which is like a news station. And every single evening after the 8 o'clock news at 8:30, they have a lecture. It's called the Broadcast University. And they have a lecture. They have any range of different things. They'll have a course on postmodernism. They'll have a course on Hasidism. I even heard a course once. I always did this when I was washing the dishes at home after dinner. I'd turn on the radio and I'd listen. There was once even a whole series on Alice in Wonderland in world literature, anything. And once they asked Rabbi Steinsaltz to give a series of depictions of biblical characters, biblical images. And what they do then is they publish all of these in little booklets. And they're fantastic because they're lectures which are crystal clear because they're given over the radio. Each lecture is only 20 minutes, right? Like today, what we'd have podcasts. And they're in semesters of like 12 or 14 lectures. And you can really cover a huge amount by reading these little booklets. And that's how this speech about Rachel and Leah was given. He did a whole series on biblical men and on biblical women. And this was what he spoke about Rachel and Leah. I sort of condensed some of but this is basically what Rav Steinsaltz said. And he depicted these two women in the following way. We all colloquially, I think popular, if you ask most kids who have been through Sunday school, been through a Jewish education, and you say to them, who do you like more, Rachel or Leah? And they'll all tell you Rachel. Rachel's the beautiful one, falls in love, it's all great. But Rav Steinsaltz says that actually, remarkably, in the world of Jewish mysticism, in the Kabbalah, Leah is seen as the higher of the two. The higher of the two. Interestingly enough, again, if you look at the family tree, which I put here on page 5, 8 of the children come from the Leah side. 4 of the children come from the Rachel side. Leah has the majority of the children. If you look at where they are buried, Leah is buried together with Jacob in the traditional burial place in Hebron in the cave of Machpelah, whereas Rachel is buried in transit, on the way, on the side of the road, in a tomb. She was given a tomb, but on the way, not in a particularly auspicious location. Funnily enough, Leah ends up, when you look backwards through history, seeming to have been the more significant of the two, being the more solid of the two. And that's remarkable. And Rachel. So here's the interesting thing. How are we going to depict Rachel? Rachel has this immense love, this immense energy, but it's an energy which is always not fulfilled. It is a tragic story. Rachel ends up being a tragic story. Rachel, frequently described with her beautiful looks and the externalities, has all this romance, but it's not fulfilled the moment she gets married and she hopes for this love to be consummated. There's, as I said, a third wheel. There's a Leah there. Okay? Rachel always wants more, and she never gets it. She wants children, and when she gets a child, she says, give me another one. And at the moment of its fulfillment, She dies. Rachel, in another story, which we didn't have a time to read, the story of the mandrakes, Reuben brings home flowers and she says, please, I want those flowers. And Leah says, okay, you want the flowers, but you give me an extra night with Jacob. And she says, okay, fine, because she needs things. Some people think that these were some sort of fertility drug. Whichever way, Rachel ends up being very needy. And ultimately, the biblical image of Rachel is Rachel crying for her children. Jeremiah says, Rachel mavaka al baneha, she's crying for her children. As opposed to the Midrash, which imagine Leah in her adolescence crying, in her death, Rachel's crying for the tragedy of the Jewish people who are led into exile. How about Leah? So Leah starts off in a more dreary space, right? And yet Leah works her way into the family. How? By having the kids. I don't know what sort of love it was. You know, sometimes when I think about this image of Leah, I think of it in the terms of Fiddler on the Roof, right? You'll remember that scene with Tevye and Golda, right? Do you love me, right? You always remember? So what does she say? Do I love him? I don't know. For 25 years, I've, washed his clothes. I've done this. If you call love, then I love you. I suppose I do, right? In other words, there are different types of love, okay? I always think the Leah love is just that love of being there, running the house. She finds her way into the family. Simply, it's a different type of relationship. Not as glamorous, but she experiences a fulfillment in that way. It's interesting that later we find the same pattern repeats itself. Let's take Rachel's main progeny, Joseph. Joseph is also good looking, but he is up and he's down, and he's up and he's down, and he's up, right? In other words, he's the most, Jacob's favorite. He's got the coat, it's all external. And then what happens? He arouses jealousy and boom, he's in the pit, sold to Egypt. He's up, again, finds himself accused by the Potiphar's wife, again, external. She grabs his clothing, right? And then he's down in the jail, and then he comes back up, right? Up and down, right? But later on, even the progeny of Rachel, King Saul, becomes a king. He initiates the monarchy, but he fizzles out. Who takes over? David, right? The David is from Judah, from the Leah. I put it this way. Maybe I'll give a couple of examples. I'll try and give a sports example, and I'll give a corporate example, okay? I cover two different sports examples. You have, of course, the sprinter, and you have the marathon runner, right? The sprinter, that's Rachel, right? High energy, but doesn't go the long haul, runs out of puff after, 100 yards, 400 yards, what have you. Marathon runner, take it slow, but he'll get there, and he'll run much faster, much further. Okay, much further. We'll get, 26 miles. In the corporate zone, we know it too. You have, your startup characters, your story of Steve Jobs in Apple, right? Come up with a genius idea, and the company soars, right? In almost startup energy, but then frequently something happens after the initial wave. The company starts to sort of dwindle. The stocks drop, and what do? Then they bring in a gray-suited accountant who can come and take the company to profitability, stabilize the product line, and what have you. And the company, continues to achieve and to be. It's almost as if, you have the first king, Saul, sets it all up. He is described, Mishich Mala, a head taller than everybody else. He's impressive. He's good looking, right? David, when Samuel first sees him, he says, that guy? He doesn't look like a kingly character, but the tribe of Judah manages to take things forth. By the way, in the Jewish tradition, there's even an idea of being a Mashiach ben David and a Mashiach ben Yosef, two messiahs. One Messiah to get through what they call, interesting metaphor, the birth pangs of Messiah. That is the Messiah of Joseph. The Rachel Messiah to get us through the turbulent time. And then this Messiah to take us through the long and steady is the Messiah, Mashiach ben David, the Messiah from Leah. In other words, what am I trying to say? I'm saying these two women who had such conflict and were fighting over the same man, maybe the hand of fate, the hand of God, destined that these two personalities should be our matriarchs. What do I mean when we say they're our matriarchs? It is their DNA, it's their energies, which we want both of them in the Jewish people, because we don't only need startup energy, we also need to know how to be there for the long haul. We need both, and sometimes you need two very different skill sets. And maybe we understand why sometimes Judah and Joseph had such a difficult time getting on, because they're very different from each other. Their energies are really at variance. The challenge, of course, is to learn how to know how to absorb them both. In a very famous speech, Rav Kook gave a speech. He was the first rabbi to actually give a eulogy for Herzl. The rabbinic community saw Herzl as a heretic. How can you stop it? And when Rav Kook spoke about Herzl, he spoke about Herzl as being the Joseph, the startup energy of the Jewish people, right? And he hoped that there would be the Joseph and the Judah, and they'd know how to get on. He actually spoke about the secular Zionists and the religion. He said, can we have a Zionism and religion? Can they work together? So we all know sometimes they have a hard time working together, right? And there are a lot of explosions on the way. But this is indeed the vision. The idea is that within our national DNA, we are yearning for Jewish unity. If you look, interestingly enough, at the last source on your sheets, we read there, a prophecy of Ezekiel. This is the prophecy immediately after the valley of the dry bones, where we see the Jewish people coming back to life. The dead bones are the bones of a whole generation who have been slaughtered in the exile, come back to life. And the very next prophecy says this: the word of God came to me and said, Son of man, that's how Ezekiel's always called by God, take a stick of wood and write on it to Judah and to Israel, his friends. And then take another stick of wood and write on it to Ephraim and the entire house of Israel, his friends. Join them together into one stick so they'll become one in your hands. Ezekiel's referring to the fact that for the last 300 years, there had been two separate Jewish countries, one called Judah and one called Ephraim. One from a Leah country and one a Rachel country. And that this had ripped the Jewish people apart. Now, usually, of course, two pieces of wood cannot become one. Two metals can merge, can become a hybrid. Wood cannot reform, but he says, you will. And when your countrymen ask you, won't you tell us what this means? He says, tell them, so says the Lord, I'll take Israel from the nations where they've gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There'll be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. This is the challenge of the story of Rachel and Leah. We all know the friction between the two sides almost led Joseph to his death. One brother killing another brother. Luckily, the book of Genesis ends with all the brothers united around Jacob's deathbed, actually still, maybe not loving each other, but still feeling they are one family. This is still a challenge for the Jewish people. We don't have to be the same. I'd say more than that. We can't be the same. We come from different tribes. Some of us feel we have that Rachel energy. Some of us feel we have that Leah energy. But we must learn that we are family together, and we must yearn to fulfill. Prophecies aren't, some people think that when you get a prophecy, it just comes true. That's not true. When you get a prophecy, it's giving us a vision, but we have to make it come true. And it's for us to know. I think it's very telling to understand that we have two mothers. We have these two mothers. We have four mothers, but in one generation we had two. And that we do come from different origins, and that sometimes there really are these deep fault lines in our heritage, and that we might find other Jews quite different to ourselves, and that might be very testing. And Rachel and Leah found it very, very difficult, and each one had felt that the other one had done them huge injustices. Leah had done Rachel injustice, Rachel had done Leah an injustice. What do you know? There was a lot of competition, and yet Ezekiel is telling us, if we want to revive our nation, we have to learn to take those two pieces of wood and to unite them. We have to become, as it says here, one nation and not two divided kingdom. That is indeed our mission, and that is my prayer, that we will learn the lesson of Jewish unity. We will realize that we do have all this baggage, but we will become one nation. We will learn, despite our diversity, to really be together. Thank you very, very much.
Is that amazing? So when you fill out your evaluation forms, instead of putting a 5, if you just want to put amazing, that's okay. So thank you, Rabbi Israel. Alex, it was just a very insightful session. I learned so much that I didn't know, and I'm really looking forward to your closing session later today. Before we get to that point, however, we have a lot of activity going on. I just want to review the schedule for you, which you all have in your packets, and then we will head off to the social hall for lunch, which is right behind us, behind this wall over here. We have lunch for about the next hour, and then we will reconvene in this room in the sanctuary without any food or drink for our rabbis panel, which I will be moderating. We're being joined by 6 of our community rabbis. After that, at about 1:45, we will have 4 breakout sessions, and we'll talk a little bit more